October 24, 1944. The Philippine Sea. Commander David McCampbell straps into the cockpit of his F-6F Hellcat aboard the USS Essex, his fuel gauge reading dangerously low before he's even started the engine. The morning brief was clear. A massive Japanese strike force somewhere between 60 and 80 aircraft is inbound to destroy the American invasion fleet at Lake Gulf. Every available fighter needs to scramble now. But McCampbell's plane wasn't fully fueled. There wasn't time. His wingman, Ensign Roy, rushing, climbs into his own Hellcat beside him. Just 2 aircraft, 2 men, against an armada that could change the course of the Pacific War. What happens in the next 90 minutes will shatter every record in U.S. naval aviation history. McCampbell will shoot down 9 enemy aircraft in a single mission, a record that stands to this day. Rushing will get 15 enemy planes destroyed by just 2 American fighters. But here's what makes the story absolutely remarkable. McCampbell didn't have some secret weapon. He wasn't flying a prototype superfighter. He was in the same Grumman F-6F Hellcat that hundreds of other Navy pilots flew. The same plane, the same guns, the same ammunition load. So, how did one pilot achieve what sounds impossible? The answer lies in a tactical revolution that transformed American pilots from underdogs into apex predators. A revolution born from capturing a single Japanese Zero that crash-landed on a remote Alaskan island 2 years earlier. That captured aircraft revealed something the Japanese had desperately tried to hide: a fatal weakness that McCampbell would exploit with surgical precision over the skies of Lake Gulf. Before we understand how McCampbell turned 15 Japanese aircraft into flaming wreckage while his own plane ran on fumes, we need to go back to where the story really begins. Not in the Philippine Sea in 1944, but in a frozen marsh on Akutan Island, Alaska, in the summer of 1942, where American sailors found something that would change everything. When Japan struck Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, American pilots got their first brutal introduction to the Mitsubishi A6M0. Fast, agile, with a range that seemed impossible, the Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outmaneuver every American fighter in the Pacific. Japanese pilots had been honing their skills in combat over China since 1937. By the time they hit Pearl Harbor, many had hundreds of hours of actual combat experience. American pilots, most had never fired their guns at anything but practice targets. In the early months of 1942, the kill ratio was devastating. For every Zero destroyed, the Japanese were shooting down 3, sometimes 4 American aircraft. The F-4F Wildcat, the U.S. Navy's primary carrier fighter, was tough and could take punishment, but in a turning dogfight against a Zero, it was a death sentence. Pilots who survived encounters with Zeros came back with the same story: don't turn with them. Don't try to climb with them. If a Zero gets on your tail in a turning fight, you're already dead. The Zero's designer, Jiro Horikoshi, had created something revolutionary. By stripping away armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and any excess weight, he'd built a fighter that weighed just 3,700 pounds empty. An American F-4F Wildcat weighed nearly 5,800 pounds. That weight difference translated into extraordinary maneuverability, but there was a problem: a fatal compromise that Japanese leadership either didn't understand or refused to acknowledge. The Akutan Zarajun. 4th, 1942. The Battle of Midway. While the main carrier battle raged 200 miles to the south, a smaller Japanese strike force attacked the American base at Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands. Flight Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga led his division of Zeros in the attack, his aircraft equipped with the latest upgrades. During the strike, anti-aircraft fire hit Koga's Zero. Not catastrophic damage, just enough to puncture his oil return line. Oil began spraying across his windscreen, losing visibility and with his engine beginning to overheat. Koga broke formation and headed for the emergency landing site the Japanese had designated, Akutan Island, a barren speck of rock and tundra, about 25 miles away. What? Koga couldn't see through his oil-smeared windscreen. was that his designated emergency landing field was actually a marsh covered in soft tundra. His wheels touched down and immediately dug in. The Zero flipped violently forward, snapping Koga's neck instantly. For over a month, the aircraft sat there, perfectly intact except for the damaged landing gear, on an island so remote that no one knew it had crashed there. Then, on July 10, 1942, a U.S. Navy patrol plane spotted something impossible: the distinctive shape of a Zero fighter sitting upright in an Alaskan marsh, intact. The revelation within days. A salvage team was lowered onto Akutan Island. They found Koga's body still strapped in the cockpit, gave him a burial with military honors, and then set about the most important intelligence operation of the Pacific War: recovering an intact, modern Zero fighter. The aircraft was carefully disassembled, shipped to San Diego, and reconstructed. By September 1942, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders was climbing into the cockpit for the first test flight of captured Japanese aircraft, serial number 4593. What Sanders discovered in the next few weeks would fundamentally alter American fighter tactics for the rest of the war. The Zero was, as suspected, extraordinarily maneuverable at low and medium speeds. In a turning fight below 250 miles per hour, nothing America had could touch it. Its rate of climb was phenomenal. Its range was unprecedented. But Sanders also discovered the Zero's Achilles heel. Above 250 miles per hour, the Zero's controls became increasingly heavy. The lack of hydraulic assistance meant the pilot had to use brute physical strength to move the stick. At speeds above 300 mph speeds, where American fighters were just getting started, the Zero became sluggish, unresponsive, difficult to maneuver. More critically, the Zero couldn't dive. Or more precisely, it couldn't dive fast. American fighters like the F-4F Wildcat, and especially the new F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair then entering service, were built heavy, armored cockpits, self-sealing fuel tanks, robust construction. All that weight was a disadvantage in a turning fight, but in a vertical dive, it became a devastating advantage. An F-6F Hellcat could dive at speeds exceeding 450 miles per hour. A Zero attempting to follow would see its controls lock up. Worse, the Zero's lightweight construction meant that at high dive speeds, the aircraft could literally tear itself apart. Japanese pilots quickly learned that diving after an American fighter at high speed was suicide. The intelligence officers at Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego compiled their findings into a tactical manual that was distributed to every fighter squadron in the Pacific. The title was simple: How to Fight the Zero. The core principle was even simpler: never fight the Zero on its terms. Always fight it on yours. Never turn. Never climb slowly. Always use speed. Always use altitude. Boom and zoom. Dive in fast. Shoot. Dive away even faster. Use your aircraft's strength, speed, firepower, and diving ability to nullify the Zero's advantages in turning and climbing. By mid-1943, American pilots trained in these new tactics, flying improved aircraft like the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, began reversing the kill ratio. By 1944, the F-6F Hellcat achieved a kill ratio of 19-1 against Japanese aircraft. But knowing the tactics and executing them under impossible pressure against overwhelming odds are two completely different things. Which brings us back to Commander David McCampbell, climbing into his Hellcat on the morning of October 24, 1944, with a fuel tank that's only 2/3 full and an enemy strike force that outnumbers him 30-1, closing fast. David McCampbell wasn't supposed to be a fighter pilot. Born in Bessemer, Alabama, in 1910, McCampbell graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1933. He served on cruisers for years before finally getting into flight training in 1938. By the time World War II broke out, he was already 31 years old, ancient by fighter pilot standards, where most aces were in their early 20s. He spent the first year of the war in shore assignments, training new pilots while watching younger men ship out to combat in the Pacific. It wasn't until 1943 that McCampbell finally got his chance, taking command of Air Group 15 aboard the USS Essex. But McCampbell had something that youth and aggression alone couldn't provide: patience, discipline, and an almost mathematical understanding of energy management in aerial combat. By October 1944, Commander McCampbell had 21 confirmed kills. He was already an ace several times over, his Hellcat painted with neat rows of Japanese flags beneath the cockpit. But he was about to face a test that would either prove his tactics or kill him. The largest naval battle in history, the Battle of Lake Gulf, was, by any measure, staggering in scale. 4 separate major engagements spread across 3 days, involving nearly 400 ships and aircraft battles involving hundreds of planes. General Douglas MacArthur had returned to the Philippines, fulfilling his famous promise. American forces had landed late on October 20, 1944. The Japanese response was desperate and massive. They were throwing everything they had left at the American invasion fleet. If Japan could destroy the American carriers and troopships at Lake Gulf, they might buy themselves months, maybe even force a negotiated peace. If they failed, the Philippines and the pathway to mainland Japan would be lost forever. The morning of October 24 brought reports that made every American pilot's blood run cold. Multiple large Japanese strike forces were inbound. Radar returns suggested 60 to 80 aircraft heading directly for the carrier task force. 2 against 60. Commander McCampbell was already in his ready room when the scramble order came. He grabbed his flight gear and sprinted for the flight deck, but immediately ran into a problem. His F-6F Hellcat hadn't been fully fueled. The deck crews had been cycling aircraft so rapidly, launching and recovering strikes, that his plane had only received about 400 gallons of fuel instead of the full 600. Any other pilot would have asked for a different aircraft. McCampbell made a split-second calculation. Every minute delayed meant the Japanese strike force got closer to the carriers. He'd make it work. Ensign Roy Rushing, only 20 years old, scrambled alongside him as his wingman. Just 2 Hellcats. The rest of Air Group 15 was either already in the air attacking Japanese surface ships, or down for rearming and refueling. 2 fighters to intercept a strike force of 60-plus aircraft. McCampbell and Rushing climbed rapidly to 25,000 feet, heading toward the last known position of the Japanese strike. At that altitude, the twin-row Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines in their Hellcats were gulping fuel at an alarming rate. McCampbell kept one eye on his fuel gauge and the other scanning the sky. Then he saw them, below and ahead, stretched across miles of sky, the largest concentration of enemy aircraft McCampbell had ever seen in one place. He would later estimate 60 aircraft, but other sources suggest the number might have been as high as 80. Zeros, Judies, Vels fighters and bombers in a massive formation heading straight for the American fleet. 60 against 2. Rushing's voice crackled over the radio. Tension barely concealed. "Skipper, what's the plan?" McCampbell's response was calm, almost matter of fact. "We're going to hit them. Follow me in. Don't try to turn with the fighters. Boom and zoom. Get your kills and get out." Then he pushed his stick forward and dove. The fight Campbell dove on the rear of the Japanese formation, lining up on a 0 flying tail and Charlie. The range closed rapidly, 500 yards, 400, 300. McCampbell squeezed the trigger. 6 .50 caliber machine guns erupted, tracers arcing across the sky. The 0 staggered, pieces flying off, then flipped into a violent spin, trailing smoke and flame. 1. McCampbell didn't watch it fall. He was already pulling out of his dive, using his excess speed to zoom back up above the Japanese formation. Rushing followed, claiming a bomber on his first pass. The Japanese formation immediately erupted into chaos. Zeros broke formation, some climbing to engage, others turning to protect the bombers. This was exactly what McCampbell wanted. A defensive formation was a scattered formation. He dove again. Another 0. this one trying to climb to intercept. McCampbell had altitude and speed. The Zero pilot had only courage. It wasn't enough. A 2-second burst. The Zero exploded. 2. Pull up. Zoom. Climb back to altitude using the speed from the dive. Check. 6 o'clock. Check fuel. Still okay, but burning fast. Did you know that the F-6F Hellcat carried only about 400 rounds per gun? That's 2,400 rounds total across 6 guns. Sounds like a lot, but at a firing rate of 800 rounds per minute per gun, a sustained trigger pull would burn through all ammunition in about 35 seconds. McCampbell was firing in controlled 2 to 3 second bursts. He was counting his ammunition in his head, doing mental math while dogfighting at 300 miles per hour. Third pass. A Judy dive bomber. The rear gunner fired wildly at McCampbell's approaching Hellcat. The .50 cal rounds from McCampbell's guns walked through the aircraft from tail to nose. The Judy nosed over into a terminal dive. 3. The Japanese fighters were starting to react more effectively now. Several Zeros turned to engage, climbing hard. But McCampbell refused to be drawn into their fight. Every time a Zero turned toward him, he simply dove away, building speed the Zero couldn't match, then zooming back to altitude outside the Zero's turning circle. Fourth pass. Another Zero. 4. Fifth pass. A bomber. 5. The Japanese formation was disintegrating. Some aircraft turned back, abandoning the mission. Others pressed on toward the fleet, now without fighter cover. McCampbell and Rushing continued their relentless attacks. Sixth pass. Zero number 6 for McCampbell. Seventh pass. Number 7, Ensign Rushing, was keeping pace. His tally climbing. 4. 5. 6. The kid was a natural, following McCampbell's lead perfectly, never getting drawn into a turning fight, always maintaining energy. Running on empty. McCampbell glanced at his fuel gauge. The needle was deep into the red. He'd been in continuous combat for over an hour. His fuel situation had gone from concerning to critical to desperate, but the Japanese formation was still heading for the carriers. Still a threat. Eighth pass. McCampbell lined up another Zero, squeezed the trigger, the guns rattled. The Zero fell away. Bernie. Ninth pass. But this time, halfway through his attack, his guns went silent. Out of ammunition. Completely dry. Ample had one Zero lined up perfectly in his sights, committed to the attack. Run. And no way to shoot it down. He did the only thing he could. He kept coming. The F-6F Hellcat weighed over 7 tons at combat weight. McCampbell flew directly at the Zero as if he intended to ram it. The Japanese pilot, seeing this apparently suicidal American fighter boring in without firing, broke hard and dove away. In the confusion, another Zero crossed in front of McCampbell's unarmed Hellcat. That pilot also panicked and dove away from what appeared to be a madman willing to sacrifice his own aircraft. McCampbell's radio crackled. Rushing's voice. Skipper, I'm Winchester. Navy terminology for out of ammunition. Same here, Ample replied. And we're on fumes. We need to head home. Now. The two Hellcats turned away from the shattered Japanese formation. Behind them, the enemy strike force, what was left of it, scattered across the Philippine Sea. Some turned back. A few pressed on, only to be intercepted by other American fighters closer to the fleet. The attack on the carriers that morning was completely broken up. Not a single American ship was hit. The long flight. McCampbell's fuel gauge was now reading well below empty. He'd been flying on fumes for the last 10 minutes of combat. The USS Essex was 60 miles away. He might not make it. He reduced power to the bare minimum to stay airborne, trimming his aircraft for maximum fuel efficiency. Rushing tucked in close on his wing. Neither pilot spoke. They both knew how close this was going to be. 40 miles from the Essex. 30, 20. Ample's engine began to sputter. His propeller windmilled, power dying. 10 miles. The Essex's deck crew spotted the two Hellcats approaching low and slow, smoking slightly, clearly in distress. They cleared the deck for emergency landings. 5 miles. McCampbell's engine quit completely. The big Pratt and Whitney seized, the propeller freezing in place. His Hellcat transformed from a fighter into a 7-ton glider. He was 3 miles from the carrier. At his current altitude and glide ratio, he could make it. Barely, the Essex turned into the wind. McCampbell focused on his landing, dead stick, no engine power, no second chances. Rushing stayed on his wing as long as he could, then broke away to circle and land after his commander. McCampbell's Hellcat crossed the Essex's fantail with feet to spare. His wheels touched the deck. The tail hook caught the number 3 wire. The Hellcat jerked to a stop. Commander David McCampbell unstrapped, climbed out of his aircraft, and walked on shaking legs toward the island's superstructure. His plane's engine was still smoking, fuel completely exhausted. Deck crew swarmed his aircraft. One crew chief popped open the ammunition bay doors to inspect for damage. He blinked in surprise. Every gun was empty, every single round expended. The maintenance crew counted McCampbell's camera gun film. Confirmed kills, 9 enemy aircraft. Rushing landed moments later. His tally, 6 confirmed. 15 Japanese aircraft destroyed by 2 American fighters in a single engagement. News of McCampbell's feat spread through the carrier task force within hours. 9 kills in a single mission. It was unprecedented. It shattered every existing U.S. Navy record for single-mission aerial combat. But here's what makes McCampbell's achievement even more remarkable. He didn't just shoot down 9 aircraft. He broke up an attack that could have changed the outcome of the entire Battle of Lake Gulf. That Japanese strike force of 60-plus aircraft was targeting American carriers. Had they gotten through, they might have crippled or sunk multiple carriers, destroying American air superiority over the Philippines. The ground invasion forces at Leyte would have been vulnerable. The entire campaign could have stalled. Instead, 2 fighters using tactics perfected from studying that captured Akutan 0 broke the attack, apart before it ever reached the fleet. Did you know that? McCampbell's 9-kill mission wasn't even his only multiple kill day during the Battle of Lake Gulf. Just 5 days earlier, on October 19th, he'd shot down 5 aircraft in a single engagement. His tally for the Battle of Lake Gulf alone was 14 aircraft destroyed, more than some entire squadrons achieved in months of combat. The tactics that won. Let's break down exactly what McCampbell did that day. Because his tactics represent the perfection of American fighter doctrine in the Pacific. First, altitude advantage. McCampbell climbed to 25,000 feet before engaging. This gave him the ability to convert altitude into speed through diving attacks. The Japanese formation was low, around 18,000–20,000 feet. That 5,000-foot advantage was the foundation of everything that followed. Second, energy management. Every attack followed the same pattern. Dive to attack. Use the speed from the dive to zoom back to altitude. Refuse engagement with climbing enemy fighters. McCampbell understood that his aircraft's weight and power gave him better energy retention than the lighter Zeros. He exploited that ruthlessly. Third, patience and fire discipline. McCampbell fired only when his target was within optimal range, usually 300 yards or less. He used short, controlled bursts of 2 to 3 seconds. This was extraordinarily disciplined for the intensity of the combat. Many pilots, especially in their first major engagement, would have emptied their guns in the first few passes from excessive trigger time. Fourth, situational awareness. Throughout the entire engagement, McCampbell maintained awareness of his fuel state, ammunition count, his wingman's position, the position of the enemy formation, and potential threats. He was processing multiple data streams while dogfighting at 300 miles per hour. That kind of multitasking under stress is what separates good pilots from legendary ones. Finally, knowing when to disengage. When McCampbell ran out of ammunition, he could have stayed to harass the Japanese formation. Some pilots would have, driven by adrenaline and aggression. McCampbell recognized that with no ammunition and critically low fuel, staying served no purpose. He broke off and headed home. That decision saved his life. Every single one of these tactical principles came directly from the intelligence gained from the Akutan 0. American pilots learned that they couldn't outturn the Zero. so they stopped trying. They learned that the Zero couldn't match them in high-speed dives, so they made diving attacks the foundation of their tactics. They learned that the Zero's lack of armor made it vulnerable to the heavy firepower of American .50 caliber guns, so they designed their attacks around getting clean, short-range shots. The medal on January 10, 1945. Commander David McCampbell stood on the deck of the USS Essex while Admiral Chester Nimitz pinned the Medal of Honor to his uniform. The citation read, in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as commander, Air Group 15, against enemy Japanese aerial forces in the First and Second Battles of the Philippine Sea. An inspiring leader, fighting boldly in the face of terrific odds, Commander McCampbell led his fighter planes against a force of 80 Japanese carrier-based aircraft bearing down on our fleet, personally destroying 9 hostile planes during the single engagement, in which the enemy formation was utterly routed and virtually annihilated. 9 kills in one mission. 7 kills in another mission just days earlier. 34 total aerial victories by the end of his combat tour, making him the U.S. Navy's all-time leading ace, a record that still stands today, but McCampbell himself always deflected credit for his achievements. In post-war interviews, he consistently emphasized 3 things: the quality of the F-6F Hellcat, the training he received, and the tactics developed from studying captured enemy aircraft. "We had excellent equipment," he said in a 1983 interview. "The Hellcat was a superb aircraft. But more importantly, we had excellent intelligence. We knew the Zero's capabilities and limitations better than some Japanese pilots did. We knew exactly how to fight it." The bigger picture. October 24, 1944, the day of McCampbell's 9-kill mission, was just one piece of the massive 4-day Battle of Lake Gulf. While McCampbell fought in the skies, massive surface battles raged across the Philippine Sea. The Battle of Lake Gulf saw the Japanese Navy commit its remaining major surface units in a desperate gamble to destroy the American invasion force. 4 separate major engagements: the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea, the Battle of Surigao Strait, the Battle off Cape Ngao, and the Battle off Samar. The Japanese lost for aircraft carriers 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. American losses were far lighter: 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort. But perhaps most devastating for Japan, they lost hundreds of experienced pilots and aircraft. Pilots like those McCampbell and Rushing shot down pilots Japan could no longer replace. The Battle of Lake Gulf effectively destroyed the Japanese Navy as an operational fighting force. After October 1944, Japan could no longer contest American control of the sea. The path to the Japanese home islands was open, and in the skies above that massive naval battle, 2 American fighters, using tactics learned from a captured Zero, had stopped a strike force that might have changed everything. Commander David McCampbell completed his combat tour in early 1945. His final tally: 34 aerial victories and 21 aircraft destroyed on the ground, making him not just the Navy's top ace of World War II, but the top carrier-based ace of all time. He was promoted to captain, then to rear admiral, eventually retiring in 1964 after a distinguished 31-year career. He passed away in 1996 at the age of 86, honored and remembered. Ensign Roar Rushing, McCampbell's wingman that incredible day, ended the war with 13 aerial victories. He survived combat, returned home, and lived a quiet life, rarely discussing his wartime service. He passed away in 2009. The USS Essex, the carrier that both men flew from, survived the war despite multiple kamikaze hits. She was eventually decommissioned in 1969 after serving in both World War II and the Korean War, and the F-6F Hellcat, the aircraft that made McCampbell's achievement possible. The Hellcat compiled the most impressive combat record of any American fighter in the Pacific War. From its introduction in 1943 until the end of the war, Hellcats destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft, while losing only 270 Hellcats in air-to-air combat, a kill ratio of 19-1. That kill ratio wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of American intelligence, tactical innovation, and learning from captured enemy equipment. The Akutan Zero's Legasithit Zero that crashed on Akutan Island. The aircraft that revealed Japan's secrets was test-flown extensively until February 1945, when it was damaged in a landing accident and finally scrapped. By that point, it had served its purpose beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Every tactical manual, written for Pacific fighter pilots, referenced data gathered from that captured Zero. Every American fighter design from 1943 onward was influenced by what engineers learned from examining its construction. Every combat engagement was shaped by the intelligence it provided. The Japanese never knew just how much that one lost aircraft cost them. They never knew that American pilots had a complete tactical handbook for defeating the Zero. They never knew that their most feared fighters' weaknesses had been systematically analyzed and exploited. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders, the test pilot who first flew the Akutan Zero, later said that captured Zero was worth more to the American war effort than any other single piece of captured equipment. It told us everything we needed to know. The cost. It's important to remember that behind these stories of tactical brilliance and technological advantage, real people paid real prices. The 15 Japanese pilots that McCampbell and Rushing shot down that day, most of them didn't survive. They fell into the Philippine Sea, young men who believed they were defending their homeland. Many were experienced pilots Japan could not replace. By late 1944, Japan's training pipeline had collapsed. New pilots were going into combat with barely 100 hours of flight time, while American pilots like McCampbell had 1,000 hours or more. The asymmetry wasn't just in aircraft quality, it was in pilot quality, training quality, tactical doctrine, and industrial capacity. By October 1944, Japan was sending up pilots who barely knew how to fly. In aircraft, they didn't have enough fuel to train in properly, using tactics that hadn't evolved since 1942. It was, increasingly, not a fair fight. But war isn't meant to be fair. The Battle of Lake Gulf cost approximately 3,000 lives on both sides. The broader Philippines campaign cost over 300,000 Japanese lives and 14,000 American lives. These numbers are staggering, each one representing a person with a story, a family, a life cut short. McCampbell's 9-kill mission is a remarkable story of skill, tactics, and technology. But it's also a story from one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. That context matters. The record that stands to this day. Commander David McCampbell holds the U.S. Navy record for most enemy aircraft destroyed in a single mission. 9 kills on October 24, 1944. That record has stood for 80 years. It will likely never be broken. Not because future pilots lack McCampbell's skill, but because aerial combat has changed fundamentally. Modern air-to-air combat happens at beyond visual range, with missiles fired from miles away. The days of dogfighting, of pilots seeing their opponents' faces, of running out of ammunition and gliding back to the carrier on fumes, those days are gone. McCampbell's achievement belongs to a specific moment in history. A moment when the tactics developed from a single captured enemy aircraft turned the tide of an entire theater of war. The story of David McCampbell's 9-kill mission isn't really about one man's extraordinary skill, though that skill was undeniable. It's about the power of intelligence, the value of learning from your enemy, the importance of tactics over raw technological superiority. When the war began, the Zero was arguably the best carrier fighter in the world. American fighters were, on paper, inferior in almost every measurable way. The early kill ratios reflected that reality brutally. But one captured aircraft, one stroke of incredible luck on a remote Alaskan island changed everything. American engineers and tacticians learned the Zero's secrets. They didn't try to build an exact copy. They didn't try to out-zero the Zero. Instead, They designed aircraft and tactics that exploited the Zero's specific weaknesses while maximizing American advantages. The F-6F Hellcat wasn't more maneuverable than the Zero. It couldn't climb as fast. It couldn't turn as tightly, but it could dive faster, hit harder, take more punishment, and fight at higher speeds where the Zero became unresponsive. And American pilots learned to fight exclusively in that performance envelope. That's the genius of McCampbell's tactics that October day. He never fought the Zero on its terms. Not once. Every engagement happened at high speed, in diving attacks, exploiting the Hellcat's strengths and the Zero's weaknesses. Boom and zoom. Attack and escape. Never turn. Never slow down. Never give the enemy the fight they want. This principle extends beyond aerial combat. In any competition, military, business, sports, life, the key isn't to be better at everything. The key is to understand your strengths and your opponent's weaknesses. Then force the competition into the arena where you have the advantage. Final image: picture Commander David McCampbell climbing down from his Hellcat on the deck of the USS Essex. October 24, 1944. His flight suit is drenched with sweat. His hands are shaking from adrenaline. His aircraft is completely out of fuel, guns empty, still smoking from the emergency dead stick landing. The deck crew is staring at him in awe. 9 kills. 9 kills in one mission. Someone asks him, "Skipper, how did you do it?" McCampbell's response: "According to those who were there, I just flew my aircraft the way it was designed to be flown, and I fought the enemy the way we'd learned to fight them. The Hellcat did the rest." Humility from a man who just achieved the impossible, but he was right. His achievement wasn't about superhuman ability. It was about perfect execution of sound tactics, learned from captured enemy equipment, flown in an aircraft specifically designed to implement those tactics. Closing statement: when that Zero crash landed on Akutan Island in June 1942. Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga had no idea he just handed America the key to winning the air war in the Pacific. When Commander David McCampbell shot down 9 Japanese aircraft in October 1944, he was proving the value of that intelligence with his life on the line. The lesson is timeless. In war, as in life, knowledge is power. Understanding your enemy, truly understanding them, is worth more than any weapon. And sometimes, the difference between defeat and victory comes down to one captured aircraft, one brilliant tactical insight, and one pilot willing to bet his life that the intelligence is correct. David McCampbell made that bet on October 24, 1944, and he won.